The security cameras caught everything. 9-year-old Lily Harper struggled up the driveway, a makeshift carrier clutched in each small hand, twin newborns wailing inside. Her thin frame swayed with exhaustion as she punched in the garage code, with trembling fingers. Alexander Prescott watched the footage from his home office next door, coffee cup shattering on imported marble as he lunged for his phone. His fingers shook as he dialed 911. There's a child with babies. Something's terribly wrong. 28 minutes later, sirens pierced the affluent neighborhood of Westlake Shores, a place where tragedies happened behind closed doors, if they happened at all. Before we jump in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 48 hours earlier, Alexander had been consumed with acquisition, reports and quarterly projections. His sprawling modern mansion on Lakeside Drive stood as a monument to his success and his isolation. At 52, the tech mogul had amassed a fortune exceeding $3 billion, but the rooms of his immaculate home echoed with emptiness. The divorce 5 years ago had left him with everything except what mattered. His ex-wife Grace had wanted children. Alexander had wanted empire. Now he had his empire, and she had moved on, remarried with twins of her own. A fact his assistant had mentioned in passing that still stung like an unexpected paper cut. The Harper house next door had stood vacant for months after the scandal. Jordan Harper, once Alexander's trusted CFO, arrested for financial crimes that had nearly toppled Prescott Innovations. The man's wife had abandoned the family shortly after, leaving behind rumors and a devastated 9-year-old daughter who was sent to live with a distant aunt in another state. Alexander had testified at the trial, his damning evidence ensuring Jordan would serve at least 15 years. He'd convinced himself it was justice, not betrayal. The neighbors had whispered that the Harper girl had been collateral damage in the corporate warfare between two titans. Alexander had silenced his guilt by donating generously to children's charities, avoiding the emptied house next door as if it were radioactive. So when the security alert pinged on his phone that Sunday morning, Alexander almost ignored it. Another false alarm triggered by neighborhood cats or ambitious raccoons. But something, intuition perhaps, or the universe's nudge, made him glance at the notification. The sight froze him, a small figure in a faded purple jacket punching numbers into the Harper House garage keypad. The system recognized the code. The door lifted obediently. But what sent ice through Alexander's veins were the two infant carriers. The child awkwardly maneuvered through the opening before the garage door descended once more. "What in God's name?" he muttered, enlarging the image. Unmistakably Lily Harper, thinner, paler than he remembered, but the same strawberry blonde hair in disheveled pigtails, and unmistakably carrying two infant seats. Alexander paced his office, debating his next move. Not his business. Probably the aunt bringing the child to collect belongings, but why use the garage code instead of a key? Why no adult visible? His rational mind offered plausible explanations, even as his instincts screamed alarm. When he glimpsed Lily through, her kitchen window alone, struggling to prepare what appeared to be baby bottles with shaking hands, he reached for his phone. 911, what's your emergency? There's a 9-year-old child who just entered the vacant house next door, 1428 Lakeside Drive. She's alone with two infants. Something's wrong. The dispatcher's professional tone shifted slightly. The child is with infants, but no adults. Are present? Correct. The house has been empty for months. Her father is incarcerated. Mother left town. Please send someone immediately. Alexander met the patrol officers in his driveway, directing them toward the Harper residence. The female officer took lead while her partner remained slightly behind, hand resting cautiously near his holster, a detail that made Alexander's stomach clench. They were approaching this as a potential crime scene. The knocks went unanswered. 3 sharp raps, then 4. Officer Bennett's voice carried across the manicured lawns. "Police, open the door, please." When Lily finally appeared in the doorway, Alexander barely recognized her. Dark circles bruised the skin beneath her eyes. Her clothes hung from a frame that had grown too quickly without proper nourishment. But it was her expression that stunned him. Wariness beyond her years, the defensive posture of someone expecting the worst. "Are you alone here, sweetheart?" Officer Bennett asked, kneeling to Lily's level. Lily's gaze darted between the officers, then fixed on Alexander with such raw hatred that he physically recoiled. "Why did you call them? Why couldn't you just leave us alone?" From inside, a thin wail rose, then another joined in harmonic distress. Officer Mitchell stepped forward. "Are those babies inside? Who's with them?" "Nobody's going to hurt them," Lily declared, her small body blocking the doorway with futile determination. "They're my brother and sister." Alexander felt the world tilt beneath him. Brother and sister. Jordan Harper had been in prison for nearly a year. "We need to come inside, Lily," Officer Bennett said gently. "We're here to help." "That's what everyone says before they take things away." Her voice cracked, tears forming, but held stubbornly in check. "He already took my dad, and then Mom left, and Aunt Patricia didn't want us anymore when she found out about the babies. I don't have anywhere else to go." The pieces weren't fitting. Alexander stepped forward, ignoring Officer Mitchell's warning glance. "Lily, where's your mother now?" The girl's face crumpled then, composure finally breaking. "At the bus station. She left us there yesterday, said she couldn't do it anymore, said we should go home where we belong." A sob escaped her. "She gave me all the money she had for formula, but it's almost gone, and they won't stop crying, and I don't know what to do." Officer Bennett moved forward, gently guiding Lily inside as her partner radioed for social services and medical assistance. Alexander remained rooted on the porch, a strange ringing in his ears. His testimony had sent Jordan Harper to prison, his refusal to show leniency despite their years of friendship, his corporate righteousness that never considered the human fallout. "Sir, you should return home now," Officer Mitchell suggested firmly. "This is a situation for professionals." Alexander nodded mechanically, turning toward his mansion that suddenly felt like a mausoleum. But as he reached his driveway, something stopped him. The memory of Lily at the company picnic 3 years ago, laughing as he taught her to skip stones across the lake. The small hand in his, trusting him completely. The way Jordan had clapped him on the shoulder. "You'd have made a great dad, Alex." Before he could reconsider, Alexander reversed course. Some debts couldn't be paid with charitable donations or tax write-offs. Some required personal accounting. Inside the Harper house, chaos reigned. The twins, a boy and girl with wispy dark hair, were being examined by paramedics on the living room floor. Lily sat nearby, answering a social worker's gentle questions. Between hiccuping sobs, the house itself told a story of abandonment, dust covering surfaces, mail piled on counters, utilities apparently reconnected only recently. "Excuse me," Alexander addressed the social worker, a woman with kind eyes and a weathered face that had seen too many children in crisis. "May I speak with you privately?" In the kitchen, under flickering lights that needed bulbs replaced, Alexander Prescott made the most impulsive decision of his meticulously planned life. "I'd like to help," he said simply, "not just financially. I want to make sure Lily and the twins stay together, stay in their home." The social worker, Diane Mackenzie, according to her ID, regarded him skeptically. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "That's not how the system works, Mr. Prescott. These children need proper placement with qualified foster parents, possibly separately given the infant's needs. Separately. The word felt like a body blow. You'd separate them after everything they've been through? It's often difficult to place 3 children together, especially with 2 being newborns. Alexander looked through the doorway at Lily, who was tenderly stroking her sister's cheek as the paramedic checked the baby's responses. Despite her exhaustion, despite being abandoned twice over, her first instinct was still to comfort. Protection burned through him with unexpected ferocity. What if I applied to be their guardian? Temporarily, until more permanent arrangements can be made. The words surprised him even as he spoke them. Ms. Mackenzie's eyebrows rose. Do you have any experience with children, Mr. Prescott? Any training in trauma-informed care? Any idea what it takes to raise a 9-year-old girl and newborn twins? No, he admitted, but I have resources. I can hire qualified help. Most importantly, I live right next door. They wouldn't lose their home, their school, their sense of place. And your relationship to the family? Alexander hesitated. Her father worked for me. We were friends once. Something in his tone made the social worker study him more carefully. The friend who testified against him. News traveled quickly in small communities, even affluent ones like Westlake Shores. Alexander didn't deny it. Yes. Why would you want to help the children of a man you helped put in prison? A fair question that deserved an honest answer. Because I've spent 5 years building technology that connects people across the world while ignoring the connections that matter most. Because putting Jordan away was legally right, but perhaps morally complicated. Because I look at Lily and see someone who deserves better than what life has dealt her. He paused, then added, quietly, and because I've lived next door to an empty house that should have been filled with a family, and I did nothing until today. Ms. Mackenzie seemed to weigh his words, her expression unreadable. It's not my decision to make. The court appoints guardians, and there's a process, evaluations, home studies. Are you prepared for that level of scrutiny, for how this might affect your business, your reputation? Alexander thought of the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow, the acquisition deal in its final stages, the shareholders who expected his undivided attention. Then he looked again at Lily, still whispering comfort to babies who shared her eyes, if not her coloring. Yes, he said firmly, whatever it takes. The next hours passed in a blur of paperwork, phone calls and arrangements. The twins, officially, named Thomas and Lily Harper, just 3 weeks old according to their hospital bracelets still attached, were cleared medically but required proper supplies. Alexander dispatched his bewildered assistant to purchase everything from cribs to diapers to formula. His housekeeper arrived without being called, somehow intuiting that her services would be needed in the long-abandoned Harper house. By evening, after countless calls to judges and county officials from Alexander's considerable network, a temporary emergency guardianship was arranged. The children would remain in their home with Alexander as their guardian, pending further court review. A nurse specializing in newborn care would arrive in the morning. Social services would conduct regular visits. It was irregular, unprecedented even, but Alexander's reputation and resources had opened doors that would have remained firmly closed to most. As twilight settled over Westlake Shores, Alexander found himself sitting on the Harpers' worn living room sofa, a sleeping infant carefully cradled in each arm. The nurse had shown him how to hold them properly, how to support their delicate necks. He sat motionless, terrified of disturbing their hard-won slumber after hours of crying. Lily appeared in the doorway, freshly showered and wearing clean pajamas that his assistant had thoughtfully included in the shopping marathon. She studied him with that same wariness, but something else flickered beneath, a fragile tendril of hope. "Why are you really doing this?" she asked bluntly, the directness reminiscent of her father. Alexander considered sugarcoating his answer, then decided this remarkable child deserved honesty. I think I've been successful at all the wrong and things, Lily, and I think helping you and your siblings might be the most important work I'll ever do. She processed this, head tilted slightly. Dad said you were the smartest person he knew before everything. The words caught in Alexander's chest. Your father was a good man who made some terrible mistakes. Mom made mistakes too, Lily said, her young voice heavy with adult understanding. She didn't want the babies, said they were just more evidence. Alexander winced, realizing the implications. The twins had been conceived during prison visits, Jordan's desperate attempt to maintain connection with his fleeing wife, born into a world that had no place prepared for them. Can I tell you something, Lily? Making mistakes doesn't make someone all bad, and trying to fix them doesn't make someone all good. We're all just figuring it out as we go. She considered this, then nodded slowly. Are you going to send us away after the reporters come? The question blindsided him. Reporters? When people find out you're helping us. The man who put our dad in jail is now taking care of his kids. That's what they call a human interest story. She pronounced the phrase carefully, clearly repeating something she'd heard. Aunt Patricia said we were toxic for her image. That's why she sent us back to Mom. Alexander felt something crack inside him, the protective shell around his carefully constructed life. I don't care what reporters say or what anyone says. I made you a promise, and I'm going to keep it. Lily didn't respond, years of broken adult promises having taught her caution. Instead, she approached slowly and reached for her brother. I can put him in the new crib. I've been practicing. Alexander carefully transferred the sleeping boy, watching as Lily expertly adjusted his swaddling blanket. You're very good with them. A hint of pride crossed her exhausted face. Mom needed help. I learned fast. As Lily carried her brother upstairs, Alexander gazed down at the remaining twin. Ellie's tiny fingers had wrapped around his thumb with surprising strength, her rosebud mouth making gentle sucking motions even in sleep. Something profound and irrevocable shifted within him, a tectonic movement of priorities, of purpose. His phone vibrated again, the 27th call from his executive team that he'd ignored today. Tomorrow would bring consequences, explanations, adjustments. The world he'd built would demand his attention, but tonight, in this dusty living room with its faded photographs of happier times, Alexander Prescott made a silent vow to 3 children who had been abandoned by everyone who should have protected them. Not again, not while I draw breath. When Lily returned for her sister, Alexander surprised himself by asking, would you like me to read you a story before bed, if you're not too old for that sort of thing? The briefest smile flickered across Lily's face, the first he'd seen since she was 7 and showing off her science fair project at the company family day. I'm not too old, she said quietly. There are books in my room, if they're still there. Let's find out, Alexander said, carefully rising with Ellie secure in his arms. As they climbed the stairs together, an unlikely trio headed toward an uncertain future. He felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not happiness exactly, but purpose, a current of meaning running beneath the surface of existence. Next door, his empty mansion stood dark and silent, its perfection suddenly seeming sterile rather than sophisticated. Alexander had spent a lifetime building walls around his companies, his heart, his potential for pain. Now, in the most unexpected circumstances, he found himself dismantling them brick by brick. The horizon beyond the lakefront windows had disappeared into darkness, but for the first time in longer than he could remember, Alexander Prescott found himself looking forward to dawn. as the emergency guardianship hearing was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday, less than 12 hours after Alexander had witnessed Lily's return. As he knotted his tie, navy silk against charcoal grey, power, colours for a man accustomed to commanding rooms. His reflection showed a stranger. Same silver-streaked hair and angular features, same bespoke suit, but the eyes held something new, determination mixed with fear. Downstairs, the recently hired night nurse was showing Lily how to properly warm formula while the twins dozed in matching bassinets. The Harper house had been transformed overnight. Cleaning service, emergency repairs, deliveries arriving hourly with everything 3 children might need. Money solved certain problems with breathtaking efficiency. Others, like the dark shadows beneath Lily's eyes or the way she startled at sudden movements, required different resources altogether. "We'll leave in 20 minutes, Alexander announced, checking his watch. "Ms. Patterson will stay with the twins." Lily looked up from the bottle she was preparing, panic flashing across her face. "I can't leave them. What if they need me?" The nurse, a grandmotherly woman with capable hands and a no-nonsense demeanor, intervened smoothly. "They'll be just fine, dear. You've shown me exactly how they like to be held, and I've got your cell phone number if we need anything at all." Alexander marveled at how this woman had already earned Lily's tentative trust, something he was still working toward. Perhaps it was her matter-of-fact approach, treating Lily as a partner in the twins' care rather than a child to be managed. "The judge needs to see you, Lily," Alexander explained gently, "to make sure this arrangement is what you want." Her expression turned guarded. "What if they don't listen to what I want? Adults usually don't." The simple truth of her statement caught him off guard. How many times had he dismissed opposing viewpoints in boardrooms, neighborhood associations, even his marriage? "This judge will listen," he promised, hoping it wasn't another adult falsehood she would add to her collection. Judge Harriet Oyolowo's chambers were deliberately informal. Comfortable seating, plants thriving on windowsills, children's artwork framed alongside her credentials. Alexander recognized the strategy instantly. Create environment conducive to honesty, especially from traumatized children. This woman was formidable in her compassion. "Mr. Prescott," she began, dark eyes assessing him over reading glasses. "You've created quite the stir in my normally quiet Monday morning docket. I apologize for the irregularity, Your Honor." "Don't apologize for stepping up when children need help," she corrected sharply. "That part I commend. It's the rest. Oh, that concerns me." She turned to Lily, her tone softening. "Would you mind waiting outside with Ms. Mackenzie for a few minutes while I speak with Mr. Prescott? There's a vending machine with chocolate if you're hungry." After Lily left, Judge Oyolowo removed her glasses. "Let's be frank, Mr. Prescott. You're asking for guardianship of 3 children, including newborn twins, when you have 0 parenting experience. You're the primary reason their father is incarcerated. You run multiple companies requiring international travel and 80-hour work weeks. And there's no biological connection to justify this extraordinary request. What am I missing?" Alexander had anticipated these objections, prepared counter-arguments as meticulously as any corporate negotiation, but sitting before this shrewd woman who held these children's fate in her hands, rehearsed responses felt hollow. "Nothing, Your Honor. Everything you've said is correct." She waited, clearly expecting more. When nothing came, she leaned forward. "Then help me understand why I shouldn't place these children with trained foster parents while searching for appropriate permanent placement." Alexander stared at his clasped hands, then met her gaze directly. "Because they've already lost everything, and I'm offering continuity, their home, their school, their community. Because separating them would be another trauma on children who've endured too many. Because I have the resources to provide everything they need: education, therapy, stability." Those are practical considerations, Judge Oyelowo acknowledged. What about the emotional component? Children aren't corporations to be managed efficiently, Mr. Prescott. They require love, patience, sacrifice. The question hung between them, unanswerable with facts or figures. Alexander thought of Ellie's tiny fingers wrapped around his thumb, of Lily's determined care for her siblings, despite her own exhaustion. 5 years ago, my wife left because I chose ambition over family, he said quietly. I've built an empire that employs thousands, but I come home to empty rooms. Yesterday morning, I was negotiating a multi-billion-dollar acquisition. By noon, I was learning how to change diapers. I can't explain why that feels more meaningful than anything I've accomplished professionally, but it does. Judge Oyelowo studied him, her expression unreadable. And what about your history with their father? Here was the crux of it, the contradiction at the heart of his request. Jordan Harper was my friend before he was my employee. What he did was wrong, and my testimony was truthful. But I've had 5 years to consider that justice without mercy is its own kind of sentence, one I imposed on Lily without consideration. He leaned forward, urgency overriding his customary reserve. I'm not trying to ease my conscience, Your Honor. I'm trying to ensure these children don't pay for adult failures, including mine, any more than they already have. The judge tapped her pen thoughtfully against her desk. Children aren't redemption projects, Mr. Prescott. No, they're not, he agreed. They're individuals, deserving of stability, opportunity, and second chances, just as their father would want for them. Something shifted in Judge Oyelowo's expression, not softer, but different. She pressed the intercom. Please bring Lily back in. When the girl returned, Judge Oyelowo spoke to her directly without condescension. Lily, I need to ask you some difficult questions. Would you prefer to speak privately? Lily glanced at Alexander, then shook her head. He can stay. He already knows the bad stuff. There's no bad stuff about you, sweetheart. Just hard circumstances, the judge corrected gently. Can you tell me what happened with your aunt? Lily's shoulders hunched slightly. Aunt Patricia took me after Dad went away, and Mum started not being okay. It was fine until Mum found out about the babies. When they were born, Aunt Patricia said she never agreed to 3 children, especially with all the media attention. She said it would damage her influencer brand. Alexander's jaw tightened at the callousness. And your mother? Judge Oyelowo prompted. She tried, Lily whispered, loyalty warring with truth. But she couldn't. She kept saying they were evidence, that everyone would know what she'd done. She started taking pills again. Then yesterday, she gave me all her money and put us on the bus, said we should go home. How do you feel about staying with Mr. Prescott? Lily looked at Alexander, her assessment unflinching. He put Dad in jail. Yes, but he didn't leave when things got hard. He came back even when the police were there, and he didn't separate us. Simple metrics from a child who had learned to measure adults by their follow-through rather than their promises. Judge Oyelowo nodded thoughtfully. One last question, Lily. If you could have anything right now, what would it be? The girl considered this carefully, surprising Alexander with her answer. I want to see my dad, to show him the twins, to tell him I'm taking good care of them like he asked me to. Judge Oyelowo glanced at Alexander, whose stunned expression confirmed he hadn't coached this response. Thank you for your honesty, Lily. You can rejoin Ms. Mackenzie now while I finish speaking with Mr. Prescott. After Lily left, silence stretched between them until Judge Oyelowo finally spoke. I'm granting temporary guardianship for 90 days with weekly supervision from social services. During that time, Mr. Prescott, you will demonstrate your commitment to these children's well-being through actions, not resources. You will also facilitate visitation with their father at the correctional facility. Alexander blinked in surprise. Visitation. These children need connection with their remaining parent, complicated as that relationship might be. Jordan Harper retains parental rights, and his children clearly need to see him. Her gaze bore into Alexander. Can you set aside your history with him to prioritize what these children need? The question cut to the heart of what this guardianship would require. Not just material provision, but emotional sacrifice, including facing the man he'd helped imprison. Yes, Alexander said after a moment, I can do that. Very well. Judge Oyolowo made several notations. Be aware, Mr. Prescott, that I'm taking an unusual approach because of these unusual circumstances. Prove me right. Outside the courthouse, Lily squinted up at him in the bright morning light. What happened? You're coming home with me, Alexander said, the reality of his new responsibilities settling onto his shoulders. All three of you. For the first time, Lily's wariness gave way to something like relief. Not happiness, that would take longer, but the easing of a burden too heavy for young shoulders. Can we stop for ice cream? She asked, a flash of ordinary childhood piercing through the trauma. Alexander checked his watch automatically, thinking of the board meeting scheduled for 11, the calls he'd ignored, the empire temporarily operating without its emperor. Then he looked at this remarkable 9-year-old who had crossed states with newborns in her care, who had protected her siblings with fierce determination when adults had failed them repeatedly. Absolutely, he said. Corporate empire be damned. Ice cream sounds perfect. The temporary guardianship papers felt heavy in Alexander's hand as he pulled into the driveway of the Harper residence later that afternoon. How strange that a single document could so completely alter the trajectory of multiple lives. He'd spent the morning with Lily at a local diner, watching her demolish a banana split while he picked at his coffee, fielding urgent texts from his executive team. The board meeting had proceeded without him, an unprecedented absence that had sent the company's stock dropping 3 points before noon. None of that seemed to matter as he helped Lily from the car, her small hand hesitantly accepting his assistance. The front door opened before they reached it, the night nurse, Mrs. Patterson, appearing with a harried expression that softened at the sight of them. Perfect timing, she said. These little ones just finished their bottles and need some attention from their big sister. Lily immediately perked up, rushing past Alexander into the house. He followed more slowly, taking in the transformation of the once abandoned property. In just 24 hours, the Harper home had gone from neglected to functional. Cleaning services had removed months of dust, repair crews had fixed the most pressing maintenance issues, and deliveries of children's necessities had arrived hourly. The power of wealth brought to bear on practical problems, yet money couldn't solve the deeper challenges evident in the tableau before him. Lily crooning softly to her fussing siblings, dark circles still prominent beneath her young eyes. Twins who instinctively quieted at their sister's voice, having already learned in their brief existence that she represented safety, the conspicuous absence of parents who should have been there. How did the hearing go? Mrs. Patterson asked quietly as they watched from the doorway. Temporary guardianship granted, Alexander replied. 90 days with weekly supervision. Only 90 days? The nurse's concern was evident. These children need stability, not another countdown to potential disruption. Alexander nodded, the same thought having occupied him since leaving the courthouse. It's a probationary period. If I demonstrate appropriate care, there's potential for extension. Mrs. Patterson studied him with the frank assessment of someone who had seen many well-intentioned beginnings fail under the weight of reality. And your businesses? Your travel schedule? Your complete lack of childcare experience? All valid concerns, he acknowledged. I'm reorganizing my professional obligations. My COO is temporarily assuming daily operational control. As for experience, He gestured toward the living room where Lily was carefully adjusting Ellie's blanket. "I'm learning." The nurse's expression softened slightly. "You'll need help, professional help, beyond what I can provide for the twins. That girl has been through more trauma than most adults could handle." Alexander followed her gaze to Lily, noting how the child's movements carried an efficiency that no 9-year-old should possess, the practiced motions of someone who had been forced to become self-sufficient too early. "I've already contacted several child psychologists who specialize in trauma. Interviews start tomorrow. And what about you?" "Me?" Alexander blinked, not understanding. "Who's helping you process this massive life change? Going from corporate titan to guardian of 3 traumatized children isn't exactly a lateral move." The question caught him off guard. In the whirlwind of the past 36 hours, he hadn't considered his own adjustment needs. His focus had remained entirely on logistics, resources, practical arrangements, the tangible scaffolding of guardianship, rather than its emotional architecture. "I'll manage," he said automatically, the response of a man accustomed to compartmentalizing personal concerns in service of larger objectives. Mrs. Patterson gave him a look that suggested she'd heard similar assertions from countless other adults who eventually crumbled under pressure. "If you intend to help these children heal, you'll need to address your own well-being too. Children are remarkably perceptive about the emotional states of their caregivers." Before Alexander could formulate a response, his phone vibrated, his executive assistant's 4th attempt to reach him in the past hour. "Excuse me," he murmured, stepping onto the back porch to take the call. "Alexander, the board is demanding answers." Vanessa's normally composed voice carried an edge of panic. "Davidson is threatening to call an emergency session to discuss leadership stability. The Jakarta deal is stalling without your sign-off. What should I tell them?" He gazed through the window at Lily, who was now reading a picture book to the twins, with exaggerated expressions, momentarily appearing like the child she was, rather than the caretaker she'd been forced to become. Something shifted in his chest. Priorities. Realigning with almost audible clicks. "Tell them I'm taking a family leave of absence," he said firmly, "effective immediately." "Family leave?" Vanessa's confusion was evident. "But you don't..." "I do now. 3 children, including newborn. Twins. I've been granted temporary guardianship. The details are complicated, but the bottom line is that I'll be working remotely with significantly reduced hours for the foreseeable future." The silence that followed stretched for several seconds before Vanessa managed, "I see. This is rather sudden. Life often is. Please have legal prepare the necessary paperwork and inform the board I'll join tomorrow's emergency session via video conference. Davidson can posture all he wants, but my voting shares still constitute controlling interest." And the Jakarta acquisition? Alexander considered this, mentally recalibrating priorities that had seemed immovable just days earlier. "Have the team proceed with the conservative valuation strategy we discussed last month. If Suharto objects, let him walk. We're no longer in a rush." After ending the call, Alexander remained on the porch, processing the magnitude of the decisions he'd just made. For 25 years, Prescott Innovations had consumed his waking hours and most of his dreams. He'd sacrificed his marriage, friendships, and any semblance of work-life balance on the altar of corporate growth. Now, with 3 words, family leave and temporary guardianship, he'd fundamentally altered that relationship. "Are you mad? About something?" Alexander turned to find Lily watching him from the doorway, her perceptiveness unsettling. "Not mad, just adjusting some work plans. Why do you ask?" "You have the same face Dad used to get when board meetings went bad." She stepped onto the porch, keeping careful distance between them, close enough for conversation but beyond easy reach. A practiced caution that spoke volumes. You spent time at his office? Lily nodded, leaning against the railing. When Mom had her bad days, he'd bring me to work. I had a special corner with books and toys. A shadow crossed her face. Everyone was nice to me then. The unspoken implication hung in the air, before Alexander's testimony, before the arrest, before their family imploded. He searched for an appropriate response and found none that didn't sound hollow. "I'm sure people will be nice to you again," he finally offered, immediately recognizing the inadequacy of the sentiment. Lily's penetrating gaze suggested she found it equally lacking. Adults always think children forget things if enough time passes. She turned back toward the door, then paused. "We don't. We just stop talking about them because it makes grown-ups uncomfortable." Before Alexander could respond, she disappeared inside, leaving him with the unsettling realization that he'd underestimated both her perception and her emotional complexity. This wasn't simply a child in need of material provisions and basic care. This was a young person carrying wounds that required far more than his wealth could address. That night, after the twins were settled and Lily had finally succumbed to exhaustion, Alexander sat in the Harper family kitchen reviewing pediatrician recommendations and child psychology referrals. The house creaked and settled around him, occasionally punctuated by an infant's cry, quickly soothed by Mrs. Patterson upstairs. He found himself studying family photographs still hanging on the walls. Jordan and his wife Sarah in happier times. Lily as a toddler, a family vacation at some mountain lake. His phone chimed with a text from Judge Oyolo's clerk. First supervised visit with Jordan Harper scheduled for Thursday, 10 a.m., County Correctional. Confirm attendance. Alexander stared at the message, a cold weight settling in his stomach. In the whirlwind of guardianship proceedings and childcare arrangements, he'd momentarily pushed aside this particular requirement, facing the man whose life he'd helped destroy, whose children he now protected. He typed confirmed and hit send before he could reconsider. The judge was right. Whatever history existed between him and Jordan, these children needed connection with their father. Alexander's discomfort was irrelevant compared to their need for continuity and relationship. Movement at the kitchen doorway drew his attention. Lily stood there in oversized pajamas, hair tousled from restless sleep. "Another nightmare?" he asked gently. She nodded, padding barefoot to the refrigerator for water. "I keep dreaming that someone takes the twins away, that I can't find them." "No one is taking them anywhere," Alexander assured her. "You have my word." Lily took a careful sip of water, studying him over the rim of her glass. "Mrs. Patterson says we're going to see Dad on Thursday." "Yes, Judge Oyolo arranged it. Will you come too?" Alexander hesitated, uncertain of the right approach. "Would you prefer I didn't?" She considered this with the same serious deliberation she seemed to apply to all questions. "Dad might be mad at you." "Probably," Alexander acknowledged. "But this isn't about me and your dad. It's about you and the twins getting to see him." "He doesn't know about Thomas and Ellie yet," Lily said quietly. "Mom never told him she was pregnant. I tried to tell him in a letter, but Aunt Patricia wouldn't mail it." Another piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Why Jordan's parental rights hadn't been specifically addressed regarding the twins. Why no official acknowledgement existed. The man had no idea he had newborn children. "Would you like me to help you prepare what to say?" Alexander offered. "It's a lot to explain, even for grown-ups." Lily shook her head. "I know what to say. I've been practicing since they were born." She finished her water and placed the glass carefully in the sink. "I should go back to bed. The babies will need me early." "Lily," Alexander said as she turned to leave, "you know it's not your job to be their parent, right? You're their sister. You should be able to just be a kid sometimes." The look she gave him contained wisdom far beyond her years. Nobody gets to just be a kid when bad things happen. That's not how the world works. With that devastating truth hanging in the air between them, she padded back upstairs, leaving Alexander to confront the sobering reality that his wealth and influence, tools that had opened every door throughout his adult life, were utterly inadequate in the face of such profound loss of innocence. The following days established a tenuous routine in the Harper household. Mrs. Patterson managed the twins' round-the-clock needs with professional efficiency, while a rotation of household staff handled practical matters, cooking, cleaning, emergency repairs to long-neglected systems. Alexander converted the home's small office into a remote workspace, conducting video conferences between diaper changes and formula preparation lessons. Lily remained a watchful presence, her cautious demeanor softening incrementally with each promise kept, each need anticipated. She shadowed Alexander throughout the day, observing his interactions with staff, listening to business calls, studying his responses to the twins with careful scrutiny, as if compiling evidence for an internal case still under deliberation. On Wednesday afternoon, Dr. Elena Michaels arrived for her first session with Lily. As the most highly recommended child trauma specialist in the region, her services typically came with a 6-month waiting list. Alexander's resources had compressed that timeline to 3 days. "I'd prefer to speak with Lily alone," Dr. Michaels explained after introductions in the living room. "Children often censor themselves when caregivers are present, even well-intentioned ones." Alexander nodded, retreating to the kitchen where he pretended to work while straining to hear any fragment of their conversation. After an hour, Dr. Michaels found him there, accepting the coffee he offered with a grateful smile. "How was she?" he asked, attempting to sound casual rather than desperate for insights. "That's primarily confidential," Dr. Michaels reminded him gently. "But I can tell you that Lily is remarkably resilient while carrying significant trauma. Her primary concern remains the welfare of her siblings. She's been their protector for too long," Alexander observed. "Yes, and that role won't simply disappear because circumstances have improved." Dr. Michaels stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "She needs to know it's safe to be a child again, to make mistakes, to express anger, to play without watching for danger. That takes time and consistent security." "How do I provide that?" "By being predictable, by following through on promises, by demonstrating that your commitment isn't conditional on her being perfect or useful." Dr. Michaels studied him carefully. "May I ask a personal question, Mr. Prescott?" "Of course. What do you hope to achieve through this guardianship? What's your long-term vision here?" The question caught him off guard. In the chaos of emergency arrangements and immediate needs, he hadn't articulated a distant horizon. "I want them to be safe together and eventually happy. Beyond that." He trailed off, realizing the inadequacy of his response. Dr. Michaels nodded as if his uncertainty confirmed something. Children who've experienced abandonment need more than temporary solutions, however well-intentioned. They need permanence, or at least the possibility of it. "Ooh, you think I'm treating this as charity work?" Alexander observed, a defensive edge creeping into his voice. "I think you responded to an emergency with admirable speed and resources," she corrected mildly. "Now I'm asking you to consider what happens after the emergency phase ends. These children have experienced multiple disruptions and abandonments. They need to know if you're a way station or a destination." The distinction struck Alexander with unexpected force. He'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that he hadn't considered the psychological implications of his temporary status. 90 days suddenly seemed like a cruel countdown rather than a reasonable probationary period. "I don't know what happens after 90 days, he admitted. "I hadn't thought that far ahead." "You should," Dr. Michael said simply. Because Lily already is. Children with trauma histories are hypervigilant about potential abandonment. She's likely counting down days, preparing herself emotionally for when you leave too. The thoughts sat like lead in Alexander's stomach. I'll need to think about this. Yes, you will. Dr. Michaels gathered her materials. I'll return Friday afternoon for our next session. In the meantime, I'd suggest you start communicating constancy in both words and actions. Lily needs evidence that you're not just another adult passing through her life. After the therapist left, Alexander found Lily sitting cross-legged on the floor of the nursery, watching the sleeping twins with fierce protectiveness. She glanced up as he entered, her expression carefully neutral. Did she tell you what we talked about? Direct, as always. No, that's private between you and Dr. Michaels. Lily nodded, seemingly satisfied with this boundary. She asked a lot of questions about Mom and Dad and Aunt Patricia. That's her job, to help you process difficult experiences. She wanted to know if I'm angry at them. Lily's fingers absently smoothed the edge of Thomas's blanket. I told her I'm not allowed to be. Alexander settled onto the floor beside her, maintaining the respectful distance she preferred. Everyone's allowed to feel angry when they're hurt, Lily, adults included. Not me. When I got angry at Aunt Patricia for sending us away, she said I was being ungrateful. When I got angry at Mom for leaving us at the bus station, she said I needed to be strong for the babies. Her voice remained steady, recounting trauma with the matter-of-factness of weather observations. Nobody wants an angry girl, they want a helpful one. The simple truth of her statement pierced Alexander's careful professional veneer. How many emotions had this child suppressed to survive? How many authentic reactions had been sacrificed to maintain adult approval and basic safety? I want you to know something, he said carefully. In this house, you're allowed to feel whatever you actually feel. Anger, sadness, confusion, all of it is valid. You don't have to be helpful or perfect to be safe here. Lily regarded him skeptically. You say that now, but adults always change the rules when feelings get too big or too inconvenient. Test me, Alexander challenged gently. Next time you feel angry or sad or scared, express it however you need to. I promise I won't punish you or withdraw support. She studied him with that penetrating gaze that seemed to evaluate souls rather than appearances. We'll see, she finally said, neither accepting nor rejecting his offer. A child who had learned to reserve judgment until evidence accumulated. Thursday morning arrived with leaden skies threatening rain, a fitting backdrop for their scheduled prison visit. Alexander fussed over the twins' outfits, changing Thomas twice before Lily intervened. Dad won't care what they're wearing, she said practically. He just needs to see them. The drive to County Correctional took 40 minutes, during which Lily grew increasingly silent, hands fidgeting in her lap. The twins, strapped into their carriers in the back seat, dozed peacefully. Oblivious to the significance of the journey, Alexander found himself rehearsing what he might say to Jordan. Explanations, justifications, perhaps even apologies. But each mental script felt inadequate against the reality of their situation. The prison processing was methodical and dehumanizing. Despite the special accommodations arranged for infant visitors, background checks, identification verification, metal detectors, pat-downs. Alexander watched Lily endure these procedures with practiced stoicism that suggested this wasn't her first visit, though surely her first with newborns in tow. The family visitation room was painted in institutional beige with bolted-down furniture and surveillance cameras mounted in every corner, unlike the standard visiting area with its glass partitions and telephones. This space allowed limited physical contact under close supervision, a concession to the research showing children's development suffered without appropriate parental touch. Alexander positioned himself near the door, attempting to become invisible as a guard escorted Jordan Harper into the room. The man who entered bore little resemblance to the polished financial executive Alexander had once considered a friend. Prison had aged him, adding grey at his temples and lines around his eyes. His standard-issue uniform hung loosely on a frame that had once filled bespoke suits. "Lily Pad," Jordan breathed, using a nickname Alexander had never heard before. His face transformed with a smile that erased years of hardship. "You've grown 3 inches since Christmas." Lily launched herself into her father's arms with abandon, all cautious restraint vanishing as he lifted her in a fierce embrace. For one crystalline moment, Alexander witnessed what this child had been before trauma reconstructed her: spontaneous, joyful, secure in unconditional love. When Jordan finally set her down, wiping suspicious moisture from his eyes, his gaze fell on the infant carriers positioned on the table. Confusion crossed his features, followed by dawning comprehension. As he looked from the babies to his daughter, "Lily," he said carefully, "whose babies are these?" "They're ours, Dad," she replied earnestly. "Thomas and Ellie. Mom had them 3 weeks ago. She didn't tell you because she was scared about what people would think. But I wrote you letters that never got sent." Jordan approached the carriers slowly, as if afraid they might disappear if he moved too quickly. He knelt beside them, one trembling hand hovering over Thomas's sleeping form before gently touching his son's cheek. "My children," he whispered, voice breaking. "How is this possible?" Lily launched into explanations, clinical details about Mom's pregnancy mixed with her own observations about the twins' personalities and preferences. Jordan listened with rapt attention, occasionally looking up with wonder at his unexpected offspring, asking questions that Lily answered with her characteristic directness. It was only after several minutes of this exchange that Jordan seemed to register Alexander's presence by the door. His expression hardened instantly, protective arm drawing Lily closer. "What is he doing here?" The question directed at his daughter, not Alexander. "Mr. Prescott is our guardian now," Lily explained carefully. "Mom left us at the bus station. He found me when I took the twins home." Jordan's face registered shock, then fury, then a complex amalgamation of emotions, too layered for simple categorization. "Alexander Prescott is your guardian, the man who put me here. Judge Oyalowo appointed him," Lily said simply. "He has a big house next door and lots of money for baby things." Jordan's gaze finally met Alexander's directly, the first eye. Contact between them since the trial 5 years earlier. The raw mixture of anger, confusion, and vulnerability in that look almost forced Alexander to turn away. Instead, he straightened and nodded acknowledgement, allowing Jordan whatever reaction he needed to process this impossible situation. "Could we have a moment, Lily?" Jordan finally asked, his tone gentle despite the tension vibrating through him. "I'd like to speak with Mr. Prescott briefly. Just adult talk." Lily glanced between them, uncertainly. "You won't fight. The guards don't like fighting. Just talking," Jordan assured her. "Why don't you show that nice officer your brother and sister while we chat? I bet she'd love to see them." After Lily reluctantly moved to the far corner with a female guard who indeed seemed delighted to coo over the twins, Jordan approached Alexander with measured steps. They stood facing each other, separated by 5 years of incarceration and a history of betrayal that seemed both monumental and trivial against the backdrop of these children's needs. "You have exactly 2 minutes to explain why you're caring. For my children, before I contact every lawyer I can reach from inside these walls," Jordan said, voice low and controlled. Alexander had prepared rational explanations, logistical justifications, practical reasoning. What emerged instead was unvarnished truth. Because they needed someone, and I was there. Because your daughter is extraordinary and deserves better than what fate has dealt her. Because separating them would have been another trauma they shouldn't have to bear. Jordan studied him, searching for deception or ulterior motives. You expect me to believe this isn't about assuaging your guilt or some elaborate corporate maneuver? Believe what you want about my motivations, Alexander replied evenly. But the fact remains that your children are together, safe and receiving everything they need, including regular visits with you, which I'll continue to facilitate regardless of our personal history. Something shifted in Jordan's expression. Not forgiveness or acceptance, but perhaps a reluctant acknowledgement of priorities beyond their conflict. Lily trusts you? He asked finally. She's reserving judgment, Alexander answered honestly. Smart kid. The ghost of a smile touched Jordan's lips. Always has been. He glanced over at his daughter, who was demonstrating the proper way to support Ellie's head to the fascinated guard. You understand this is temporary. When I get out— Of course, Alexander interjected. I'm not trying to replace you, Jordan. I'm just making sure they're okay until you can take over again. Jordan's jaw worked as he processed this statement. My release hearing isn't for another 4 years. Then they'll have stable support for 4 years, Alexander said simply. My temporary guardianship is 90 days, but I'll petition for extension if that's what's best for them. A complex mixture of gratitude and resentment crossed Jordan's features. Why are you doing this, Alex? Really? The use of his nickname, casual intimacy from their friendship before everything imploded, caught Alexander off guard. Because I've spent 5 years building technology to connect strangers while ignoring the humans right in front of me. Because your daughter showed up with twin infants and nowhere to go. Because maybe we both deserve a chance to rewrite our story. Jordan held his gaze for a long moment before nodding once. Not agreement exactly, but acknowledgement. He turned back toward Lily and the twins, his posture softening as he focused on his children. We'll revisit this conversation regularly, he said over his shoulder. And Alex, if you ever hurt them or fail them in any way, you'll have to get in line behind me, Alexander finished quietly. I'm already terrified of getting this wrong. Jordan glanced back, surprise registering at this admission of vulnerability. After a moment, he offered the smallest nod of recognition, one father to another, despite all the complications between them. For the remainder of the visit, Alexander observed from a distance as Jordan held his newborn children for the first time. His weathered face transformed by wonder as Ellie wrapped tiny fingers around his calloused thumb. Lily narrated their short lives with the detailed precision of a primary caretaker, her animation and expressiveness revealing glimpses of the child who existed beneath layers of premature responsibility. When their time ended, Lily clung to her father with desperate intensity. I'll take good care of them until you come home, she promised. I won't let anyone separate us. Jordan held her face between his palms, his expression fierce with love and pride. You are the bravest person I know, Lily Pad. But you don't have to carry this alone anymore. His gaze flicked briefly to Alexander. Let the adults handle the adult problems for a while. Your job is to be 9. In the car afterward, Lily sat silently watching raindrops race down her window, processing emotions too complex for verbal expression. The twins fussed slightly, perhaps sensing the shift in atmosphere. Alexander drove carefully through the downpour, hyper-aware of the precious cargo in his care and the weight of the promise he'd just made, not just to Jordan, but to himself. He doesn't hate you as much as I thought he would, Lily observed, suddenly breaking the extended silence. Alexander glanced at her, startled by her perceptiveness. We have a complicated history. I know. You testified against him in court and helped send him to prison. matter of fact, without accusation. Aunt Patricia said you betrayed him because you were jealous of his success. Alexander winced internally at this characterization. The situation was more complex than that. Your father made some choices that violated laws and ethical standards. My testimony was truthful, even if the consequences were painful for everyone involved. Lily considered this, her expression thoughtful beyond her years. Dad told me once that sometimes good people make bad choices for what seem like good reasons. He said that's what happened to him. The simple wisdom of this observation caught Alexander off guard. Your father is right about that. Does that mean you're a good person who made a bad choice too, when you testified? The question hung between them, innocent yet penetrating to the heart of Alexander's own moral reckoning these past 5 years. Had his testimony been purely about justice and corporate ethics? Or had there been an element of competitive vindictiveness, of self-righteousness that allowed him to ignore the human consequences? I don't know, Lily, he answered honestly. I think I was trying to do the right thing, but I didn't consider how it would affect you and your family. That was wrong of me. She nodded, seemingly satisfied with this acknowledgement. Dad says apologies don't mean much, unless you try to fix what you broke. Your dad is wise in many ways, Alexander conceded, the irony not lost on him. I can't undo the past, but perhaps caring for you and the twins is a start toward making amends. Maybe. Lily agreed cautiously. After another moment of contemplation, she added, I'm glad you came with us today. Dad seemed less worried knowing we're not alone. The simple statement carried the weight of tentative approval. The first Alexander had received from this solemn child who guarded her trust like a rare treasure. Not forgiveness or acceptance, but perhaps the beginning of a bridge across the chasm between them. As they pulled into the driveway of the Harper home, the rain finally subsiding, Alexander found himself contemplating Dr. Michael's question about his long-term vision. Temporary guardian, way station or destination, 90 days or something more enduring. What exactly was he offering these children who had already endured too much disruption? The answer remained elusive. But watching Lily carefully unbuckle Ellie's carrier with practiced hands while humming a soft lullaby, Alexander knew with sudden clarity that whatever came next, these children would never again face their challenges alone. The emergency board meeting appeared on Alexander's laptop screen like a Renaissance painting of disapproval. 12 faces arranged in varying expressions of concern, frustration, and barely concealed ambition. From his makeshift office in the Harper home, Alexander straightened his tie and prepared for the corporate equivalent of a tribunal. Gentlemen, ladies, he began, voice steady despite Thomas fussing in the background, where Mrs. Patterson attempted to soothe him. I appreciate you accommodating this virtual format on short notice. Richard Davidson, head of the Compensation Committee and Alexander's longest-standing rival, leaned forward with predatory focus. I think we're all curious about this sudden family emergency that's taken priority over the Jakarta acquisition and our quarterly projections review. The emphasis on family carried clear skepticism. Alexander had expected this. His reputation as a work-obsessed bachelor preceded him. Still, the implied accusation stung more than anticipated. As I've communicated to the executive team, I've assumed temporary guardianship of 3 minor children whose circumstances required immediate intervention. This responsibility necessitates a period of reduced availability while appropriate care arrangements are established. Murmurs rippled through the gallery of faces. Miranda Chung, CFO and one of Alexander's few allies on the board, spoke up. Alexander, while we respect your personal choices, the timing is concerning. We're 6 days from closing the Jakarta deal, our Q3 projections are under review, and the European expansion requires your direct involvement with regulatory bodies. It was a fair assessment, delivered without Davidson's thinly veiled hostility. Alexander acknowledged it with a nod. All valid points, Miranda. However, I've implemented contingency protocols. Aditi is handling Jakarta negotiations with my remote input. Quarterly projections were already 90% complete before this situation arose. As for European regulatory meetings, I've arranged for postponement until next month, when I can travel with appropriate childcare support in place. Davidson's expression soured further. The issue isn't whether you've delegated effectively, Prescott. It's that you've unilaterally decided your personal agenda overrides corporate priorities. The board was not consulted about this. Lifestyle, change. The condescension in his tone ignited something protective in Alexander. On cue, as if sensing the tension, Ellie began crying in the nursery. The sound carried clearly through the connection. "Is that an infant?" questioned Marjorie, Reynolds looking genuinely confused. Alexander maintained his composure with effort. "Yes, one of the twins I mentioned. Board members, let me be transparent. 30 minutes before this meeting, I held a 3-week-old who exists because his mother visited his father in prison. Yesterday I watched a 9-year-old explain abandonment to her newborn siblings because that's the reality she understands. My presence here is necessary in ways that transcend corporate governance." The blunt assessment silenced even Davidson. Momentarily. "These are human beings, not scheduling conflicts," Alexander continued, finding his voice strengthening rather than faltering. "And while Prescott Innovations remains a priority, it cannot be the only priority. Not anymore." Vanessa appeared in the office doorway, silently signaling an urgent matter requiring his attention. Alexander held up one finger, asking for a moment. "I've invested 25 years building this company from a garage startup to a global enterprise. That hasn't changed. What has changed is my understanding of what constitutes an emergency. I'm proposing a 90-day leadership adjustment with clearly defined protocols for essential decisions requiring my input. The full proposal has been distributed to your secure portals." Miranda studied him thoughtfully. "You've clearly given this considerable thought." "I have," Alexander confirmed, "and I recognize it's an unprecedented request, but extraordinary circumstances demand extraordinary measures." Davidson seized his opening. "Precisely our concern. These extraordinary circumstances appeared literally overnight. The board must question whether your judgment has been compromised by emotional factors." Vanessa's urgent gestures grew more insistent. Alexander ignored the bait Davidson had dangled and addressed the board collectively. 20 minutes before this meeting, I received notification that our European patent application was approved. 6 months ahead of projected timeline, the team executed flawlessly using the distributed leadership model I've been developing for the past year. This isn't an abandonment of responsibilities, it's a test case for our succession planning. He glanced toward the doorway, where Vanessa now held up a note. "Social services here for first inspection." "I need to step away briefly," Alexander announced. "In my absence, please review the leadership transition proposal. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes for questions and vote." Without waiting for objections, he muted the connection and hurried to the front door where Diane Mackenzie waited with clipboard in hand and skepticism evident in her posture. "Mr. Prescott," she greeted formally, "I'm here for our first weekly supervision. I see you're in the middle of something." "A board meeting," he explained, leading her inside. "One of many adjustments we're all making." Her raised eyebrow suggested she was cataloging this as another example of competing priorities. "And the children?" "Lee's at school, her first day back since returning. I've arranged for the guidance counselor to check in with her hourly. The twins are upstairs with Mrs. Patterson, our night nurse, who agreed to extend her shift during this transition. Period." He led Ms. Mackenzie through the house, painfully aware of her noting every detail, the hastily established nursery, the remote workspace crammed with both corporate and childcare references, the schedule posted on the refrigerator with medication times, feeding intervals, and Lily's school activities meticulously documented. "Es ist ganz titum, Nana. You've been busy," she observed, tone neutral. "There's been a significant learning curve," Alexander admitted. "Fortunately, I have experience with accelerated skill acquisition. Child rearing isn't a technological innovation, Mr. Prescott. It's not about efficiency or optimization. I'm discovering that," he acknowledged, daily. Upstairs, Mrs. Patterson welcomed the social worker with professional courtesy while continuing to rock Thomas, who had finally settled. Ellie slept peacefully in her bassinet, tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket. "May I ask your assessment of Mr. Prescott's caregiving abilities?" Ms. Mackenzie directed at the nurse while examining the nursery setup. Mrs. Patterson considered the question carefully. "He's attentive, quick to learn, and genuinely concerned with the children's well-being. Inexperienced but committed. And his availability, I understand he runs several companies." "He's present," Mrs. Patterson stated firmly, "physically and emotionally. More than can be said for many experienced parents I've worked with." Ms. Mackenzie made several notations before turning to Alexander. "And Lily, how is she adjusting?" "She's resilient but guarded," he answered honestly. "We've engaged Dr. Elena Michaels for trauma-informed therapy. First session was yesterday, with another scheduled tomorrow." "Dr. Michaels has an excellent reputation," Ms. Mackenzie acknowledged, apparent surprise coloring her tone. "She typically has a substantial waiting list." Alexander didn't elaborate on how he'd secured priority appointments. Some advantages of wealth were better left unstated. "We visited their father yesterday," he offered instead. "Jordan hadn't known about the twins. It was emotional for everyone involved." This caught Ms. Mackenzie's full attention. "You personally accompanied them to the prison." "Of course. Lily needed support, and the twins required monitoring during transport. Most guardians in your position would have delegated that task, particularly given your history with Mr. Harper." Alexander met her evaluating gaze directly. "These children have experienced enough disruption and abandonment. Some responsibilities shouldn't be delegated regardless of personal discomfort." Something shifted in the social worker's expression. Not approval exactly, but perhaps reassessment. "You understand this arrangement remains temporary pending ongoing evaluation." "I'm aware of the terms," Alexander confirmed. 90 days, with weekly supervision and court review. "And yet, you've made substantial investments in their care, staff, therapy, home modifications. That suggests longer-term thinking." Alexander considered his response carefully. "These children deserve stability and proper support regardless of time frame. I wouldn't provide less simply because the arrangement has an expiration date." Ms. Mackenzie studied him with practiced professional assessment. "Most affluent temporary guardians establish adequate but impersonal care. You appear to be personally investing beyond reasonable expectations. Is that problematic? It raises questions about boundaries and expectations, yours and theirs." She gestured toward the nursery with its carefully selected furnishings and personalized touches. "You're creating a home, Mr. Prescott, not a temporary placement that has implications for attachment and eventual transition." The observation struck Alexander with unexpected force. Was he overstepping, creating attachments that would only cause additional pain when severed? Or was Ms. Mackenzie suggesting something else entirely? Before he could formulate a response, his phone chimed with an urgent alert, the board meeting resuming in 2 minutes. Simultaneously, the school's number appeared on the screen with an incoming call. "I need to take this," he apologized, stepping into the hallway to answer while Ms. Mackenzie continued her inspection. The guidance counselor's voice carried controlled concern. "Mr. Prescott, I wanted to let you know there's been an incident with Lily. She's physically fine," she added quickly. "But there was an altercation with another student who made comments about her father's incarceration." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "What happened?" Lily reacted, out strongly, verbally at first, then physically when the taunting continued. "She's in my office now, quite upset but refusing to discuss the matter." "I'll be there in 15 minutes, Alexander replied, already calculating the cascade of consequences. Bored. Meeting abandoned, social services inspection interrupted, potential school disciplinary action. He returned to the nursery where Ms. Mackenzie was reviewing feeding charts with Mrs. Patterson. "I apologize, but there's a situation at Lily's school requiring immediate attention. Would it be possible to reschedule the remainder of our inspection?" The social worker's expression suggested this development confirmed her concerns about his divided attention. "Mr. Prescott, part of our evaluation involves your ability to manage competing priorities." "I understand that," Alexander acknowledged. "And right now, Lily's need takes precedence over both this inspection and my board meeting. I believe that's the correct prioritization." After a moment's consideration, Ms. Mackenzie nodded. "I'll continue my assessment with Mrs. Patterson while you handle the school situation. We can discuss my observations when you return." In the hallway, Alexander quickly messaged Vanessa, "Family emergency. Please convey my apologies to the board and request 24-hour postponement on vote. Emphasize that this situation exemplifies exactly why our leadership distribution model is essential." 15 minutes later, Alexander strode into Westlake Elementary's administrative offices to find Lily seated outside the principal's office, arms crossed defensively, eyes fixed on the floor. A small cut adorned her knuckle, evidence of contact with something harder than flesh. He settled into the chair beside her without speaking, simply offering presence until she was ready to acknowledge him. After several minutes of tense silence, Lily finally muttered, "Are you mad?" "No," Alexander answered honestly. "I'm concerned about what happened, but I'm not angry with you." She looked up, skepticism evident. "I hit someone. Adults are always mad about that." "I imagine there were circumstances involved," Alexander replied carefully. "I'd like to hear your perspective before forming any conclusions." Lily studied him as if searching for deception, then shrugged. "Tyler Miller said Dad was a criminal who stole money and deserved to be locked up forever. He said Mom abandoned us because she was ashamed. He said the twins would probably end up in foster care because nobody wants damaged kids." Each word landed like a physical blow. Alexander maintained neutral expression through significant effort. "That must have been painful to hear. I told him to shut up. He wouldn't. I pushed him. He called me trash. That's when I hit him." She demonstrated a surprisingly technical right hook. "Dad taught me where to aim." Of course, Jordan had ensured his daughter could defend herself, perhaps the most prescient parenting decision he'd made. Alexander fought unexpected admiration for the man's foresight. "Violence isn't the optimal solution," he began, then paused at Lily's eye roll. "But I understand why you felt pushed beyond verbal responses." Her surprise at this reaction was evident. "You're not going to lecture me about using my words and walking away." Would that have worked with Tyler Miller? Lily considered this seriously. No, he wanted a reaction. He wasn't going to stop until he got one. "Some people are like that," Alexander acknowledged. "The question becomes how to respond effectively while protecting yourself. By punching them in the nose." Despite the seriousness of the situation, Alexander fought a smile. Effective in the immediate term, perhaps, but with substantial consequences. There might be alternative approaches worth exploring. Before Lily could respond, the principal's door opened. Dr. Harriman, a thin man with perpetually worried eyes, gestured them inside where Tyler and his mother already waited. Mrs. Miller, whose Instagram lifestyle brand Alexander vaguely recalled from community events, sat with perfectly maintained outrage, arm around her son, whose reddened nose suggested Lily's aim had indeed been true. "Mr. Prescott," Dr. Harriman began awkwardly, clearly uncomfortable addressing someone whose name adorned the school's STEM building. "I appreciate you coming in. We have a situation that requires parental involvement." Mrs. Miller interrupted immediately. "My son was physically assaulted by this girl." She gestured dismissively toward Lily. "We expect appropriate disciplinary action and are considering pressing charges." "Pressing charges against a 9-year-old? Alexander kept his tone. "Mild, despite the surge of protective anger. That seems disproportionate, particularly given the reported circumstances." "Circumstances?" Mrs. Miller's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. "My son was innocently conversing when this violent attack occurred." Alexander turned to Tyler, whose smug expression belied his victim posture. "Is that accurate, Tyler? You made no comments about Lily's father or family situation." The boy's confidence faltered slightly. "I was just telling the truth. Everyone knows her dad's in prison." "And did you mention foster care? Or use the word trash?" Alexander pressed, maintaining professional demeanor despite growing anger. "Tyler would never," Mrs. Miller began. "Mom, it's fine," Tyler interrupted, clearly calculating his position. "I might have said some things that were taken the wrong way, but that doesn't excuse violence." Alexander addressed Dr. Harriman directly. "Were there witnesses to this interaction?" The principal nodded uncomfortably. Several students corroborated that Tyler made provocative statements before the physical altercation. However, our zero-tolerance policy on violence applies regardless of provocation. "I understand school policies," Alexander acknowledged, "and Lily will accept appropriate consequences for her actions. However, I'd like to understand what consequences Tyler faces for deliberate emotional harassment based on family circumstances beyond Lily's control." Mrs. Miller bristled visibly. "Are you suggesting my son deserves punishment for speaking facts?" "I'm suggesting that deliberately targeting a child's trauma regarding imprisoned and absent parents constitutes bullying under the school's own published guidelines." Alexander removed his phone, pulling up the relevant policy with practiced efficiency. Section 4.3 specifically prohibits comments targeting family structure, parental absence, or legal circumstances beyond the student's control. Dr. Harriman shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Prescott makes a valid point, Mrs. Miller. Both students appear to have violated school policies." The carefully cultivated outrage on Patricia Miller's face transformed to calculation as she recognized the changing dynamics. Alexander Prescott's influence in the community substantially outweighed her social media presence, a fact now visibly factoring into her response. "Perhaps we could resolve this without formal proceedings," she suggested, tone softening dramatically. "Children sometimes misunderstand boundaries, with proper apologies exchanged." "I believe separate consequences remain appropriate," Alexander interrupted gently. "Lily understands that physical responses carry repercussions regardless of provocation. I trust Tyler will similarly understand that targeting vulnerable peers with cruel commentary about their family circumstances is equally unacceptable." Throughout this exchange, Lily had remained silent, watching the adult negotiations with wary assessment. Now she straightened slightly, a flicker of something like respect crossing her features as she observed Alexander advocating for nuanced justice rather than simple punishment. After additional discussion establishing 2-day suspensions for both children, Lily for physical aggression, Tyler for documented bullying. Alexander escorted Lily to the car in silence, processing the complexities of guardian advocacy versus enabling inappropriate behavior. "You're thinking really loud," Lily observed as they pulled away from the school. Alexander glanced at her, surprised by her perceptiveness. "I'm considering balanced responses to complex situations. You're wondering if you should punish me more, even though you think Tyler deserved what happened," she translated with uncomfortable accuracy. "Something like that," he acknowledged. "Violence isn't an acceptable response to verbal provocation, regardless of how justified your anger. But I also recognize you were defending your family in the only way that felt available in that moment." Lily considered this, fingering the small bandage the school nurse had applied to her knuckle. "Dad always said sometimes you have to stand up for what matters, even when it costs you something." The echo of Jordan's philosophy twisted something in Alexander's chest. The complexity of a man who had committed financial crimes, yet imparted genuine wisdom to his daughter. People were never simply heroes or villains, a truth the corporate world often overlooked in favor of cleaner narratives. "Your father was right about that," Alexander conceded. "The challenge becomes identifying when that principle applies, and when other approaches might achieve better outcomes with fewer negative consequences." Like what? Like recognizing when someone is deliberately attempting to provoke reaction and strategically denying them that satisfaction. He navigated through an intersection, choosing words carefully, or understanding when involving authority figures might be more effective than direct confrontation. Lily's skeptical expression suggested limited faith in authority figures, an understandable position given her experiences with adults who consistently failed her. "Tell you what," Alexander proposed. "Your suspension means 2 days at home. We could use that time to develop some response strategies for difficult situations. Dr. Michaels might have suggestions during your session tomorrow." "You're not going to take away my iPad or whatever?" Lily questioned, clearly expecting traditional punitive measures. "The suspension is your consequence for choosing physical response," Alexander explained. "Additional punishment seems redundant. I'm more interested in helping you develop alternative tools for future situations." Lily studied him with that penetrating gaze that consistently made Alexander feel transparent. "You're weird," she finally declared. "Most grown-ups just want kids to be sorry and promise never to do it again." "Are you sorry?" She considered. "This seriously. I'm sorry I got suspended. I'm sorry I have to miss the science fair registration. I'm not sorry I hit Tyler." "Fair enough," Alexander acknowledged, appreciating her honesty. "Authentic remorse can't be manufactured through punishment anyway." Upon returning home, Alexander found Ms. Mackenzie completing her inspection notes in the kitchen while Mrs. Patterson prepared bottles for the twins' next feeding. "How was the school situation?" the social worker inquired, expression neutral. "Complicated," Alexander replied, gesturing for Lily to join Mrs. Patterson. "Lily, would you mind helping with the twins while I speak with Ms. Mackenzie?" After Lily disappeared upstairs, Alexander explained the situation succinctly, emphasizing both appropriate consequences and supportive advocacy. "Striking balance between discipline and protection can be challenging," Ms. Mackenzie observed, "especially with children from trauma backgrounds who've experienced abandonment after displaying difficult behaviors." The insight pierced Alexander's carefully maintained professional veneer. "You think she's testing boundaries to see if I'll abandon her too?" Children from disrupted attachments often unconsciously recreate rejection scenarios to confirm their internal working models, Ms. Mackenzie confirmed. "It's not manipulation but self-protection. Better to control when rejection happens than be surprised by it." Alexander absorbed this, recognizing patterns in Lily's behavior since her arrival. the careful distance maintained, the watchful assessment, the periodic testing of limits followed by withdrawal when support remained consistent. "I didn't abandon her today," he said quietly, more to himself than Ms. Mackenzie. "No, you didn't," she acknowledged. "That matters significantly." She closed her notebook with finality. "My preliminary assessment indicates appropriate care standards are being met. The children's basic needs are addressed, safety protocols observed, and professional support engaged where needed." Alexander waited for the but that typically followed such evaluations. "I remain concerned about long-term planning and attachment implications," Ms. Mackenzie continued predictably. 90 days is our standard temporary placement duration because children require permanence planning. By our next evaluation, I'll need clearer indications of your intentions beyond the probationary period. The question of permanence had occupied Alexander's thoughts increasingly since Dr. Michaels raised similar concerns. Temporary guardianship had been an emergency response. Longer-term considerations remained ambiguous even to himself. "I understand," he acknowledged. "I'll have more concrete planning in place by our next meeting." After Ms. Mackenzie departed, Alexander found himself standing in the nursery doorway, watching Lily expertly burp Ellie while Mrs. Patterson handled Thomas. The practiced ease between them suggested familial cohesion rather than temporary arrangement, a reality both heartwarming and complicated given the provisional nature of their situation. His phone vibrated with increasingly urgent messages from Vanessa regarding the board's reaction to his abrupt departure. Corporate consequences awaited his attention. Potential leadership challenges, shareholder concerns, succession planning acceleration. Yet watching Lily's gentle care of her sister, the protective love evident in every careful movement, Alexander found his priorities crystallizing with unexpected clarity. That evening, after the twins were settled and Mrs. Patterson had departed, for her brief rest period before night shift resumed, Alexander sat with Lily on the back porch, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. They'd ordered pizza for dinner, a small celebration for navigating the day's challenges, and Lily had actually eaten 2 slices instead of her usual careful picking. "Ms. Mackenzie seems nice," Lily offered unexpectedly, breaking their comfortable silence. "Not fake nice like some social workers?" Alexander nodded, appreciating her perceptiveness. "She seems genuinely concerned with your well-being. She asked if I feel safe here, with you." Lily's tone remained carefully neutral, conveying information without revealing her own response. "What did you tell her?" Alexander asked, equally careful. Lily studied a firefly that had landed briefly on the porch railing. "I told her you're different from other grown-ups. You say hard, true things instead of easy, fake ones." The assessment caught Alexander off guard, both its insight and the implied approval. "Thank you. I try to be honest, even when it's difficult." "She asked if I want to stay here after the 90 days, Lily continued, still not making eye contact. "If the court lets you keep us longer." Alexander's heart rate accelerated slightly, recognizing the significance of this conversation. "What did you tell her?" Lily shrugged, affecting casualness that didn't match the intensity of her focus on the fireflies. "I said I don't make plans anymore. Plans always break." The simple statement carried devastating weight, the accumulated wisdom of a child who had learned through painful experience that adult promises evaporated, that stability was illusion, that attachment invited abandonment. "That's a hard lesson to have learned so young," Alexander acknowledged softly. "What happens when the 90 days end?" she asked suddenly, finally turning to face him directly. "Will we go to different foster homes? Will the twins be adopted by someone else? Will I ever see them again?" The questions tumbled out with increasing urgency, revealing the fears that had clearly occupied her thoughts despite her outward stoicism. Alexander recognized the courage required to voice these vulnerabilities, each question exposing another potential heartbreak. "I don't want that to happen," he answered honestly. "I want you all to stay together." "But what if the judge says no? What if they think you're not supposed to be our guardian because of what happened with Dad?" Valid concerns that had occupied Alexander's own planning. "Then I'll appeal the decision and request extension while searching for placement options that keep you together." Lily's gaze remained doubtful. Aunt Patricia said nobody wants 3 kids, especially with babies. She said the system splits up siblings all the time. Aunt Patricia was wrong about many things, Alexander responded, careful to maintain respectful tone despite his opinion of the woman who had abandoned these children when inconvenient. And she didn't account for people with sufficient resources and determination to overcome system limitations. Like you? Lily's question carried equal parts hope and skepticism. Alexander chose his words with deliberate care, aware that promises carried extraordinary weight with this child who had experienced too many broken ones. "I can only tell you my intentions, which are to ensure you remain together in a stable, supportive environment for as long as necessary. Whether that's with me or with your father when he's released depends on many factors, including legal considerations and what's deemed best for your well-being." Lily seemed to weigh this response, measuring its honesty against her experiences. "Dad said you always planned 10 steps ahead. That's why you were such a good chess player." Your father and I used to play every Friday," Alexander recalled, surprised by the bittersweet memory. "He usually won." "So, what's your 10-step plan for us?" Lily pressed, unwilling to be distracted by nostalgia. Alexander recognized the crucial nature of this moment, his answer potentially shaping her sense of security and trust. Platitudes would insult her intelligence. Absolute guarantees would be dishonest, given the complex legal and practical realities. Step 1 was emergency placement, keeping you together when your mother left, he began thoughtfully. Step 2 involved establishing appropriate care, staff, medical support, therapy. Step 3 focused on legal standing, securing temporary guardianship. Step 4 concentrates on stability, maintaining your home, school connections, and relationships, including regular visits with your father. Lily nodded, following his logic. And Step 5, evaluation for extended guardianship beyond 90 days, Alexander continued. Step 6 would involve educational planning, ensuring appropriate schooling for you and eventually the twins. Step 7 addresses financial security, establishing trusts for your future needs regardless of where you live. Step 8 focuses on maintaining family connections, particularly with your father as he works toward release. That's only 8 steps, Lily pointed out. Alexander smiled slightly at her attentiveness. Step 9 remains flexible, adapting to changing circumstances and your evolving needs as you all grow. And Step 10, he paused, considering how to articulate the commitment forming in his mind. Step 10 ensures that whatever happens, wherever life takes us all, you'll never again face challenges alone. You'll always have someone in your corner, advocating for your well-being and happiness. Lily absorbed this, her expression shifting through multiple emotions before settling into cautious acceptance. That's a pretty good plan, she finally acknowledged, except the part where you don't actually say if we'll stay with you or not. Alexander appreciated her directness, a quality that reminded him of Jordan at his best. That's because I can't ethically promise something that requires court approval and consideration of multiple factors. What I can promise is that I will Do everything within my considerable power to ensure you remain together in a stable, loving environment, whether that's with me permanently or in preparation for reunification with your father. You'd really let us go back to Dad when he gets out?" Lily seemed surprised by this possibility. "Even after everything?" "Your father made mistakes that had legal consequences," Alexander replied carefully. "But he's still your father. And he loves you deeply. That was evident when we visited. If he demonstrates readiness to resume parenting responsibilities after release, supporting that transition would be the right thing for everyone." Lily's shoulders relaxed slightly. The first genuine release of tension Alexander had witnessed since her arrival. Most people just want to punish him forever. Punishment without possibility of redemption serves little purpose, Alexander observed, surprising himself with the evolution of his thinking on this matter. "Your father is serving his sentence. When that's complete, he deserves the opportunity to rebuild his life and family." They sat in companionable silence for several minutes, watching fireflies create patterns in the darkening yard. Finally, Lily spoke again, her voice softer than usual. "I think I want to stay, if that's okay." The simple statement carried profound weight, a first tentative step toward trust from a child who had every reason to withhold it. Alexander recognized it as the precious gift it was. "It's more than okay," he assured her quietly. "It's exactly what I want too." As darkness settled fully around them, Lily moved almost imperceptibly closer on the porch swing until her shoulder just barely touched Alexander's arm. Not quite leaning, not fully independent. A perfect metaphor for their evolving relationship. Connection established but autonomy maintained. Trust offered but caution preserved. Alexander remained perfectly still, allowing her to dictate the terms of physical proximity. In the distance, the twins' monitor captured soft breathing from the nursery, the rhythmic sound creating peaceful counterpoint to the evening chorus of crickets and distant frogs. 90 days suddenly seemed simultaneously too brief for all. They needed to build together and entirely adequate for confirming what Alexander increasingly believed. These children belonged here, with him for as long as they needed a home. The logistics, legalities, and professional adjustments remained daunting, but the central question had clarified with unexpected simplicity. Family wasn't always what you were born into. Sometimes it was what found you when you weren't looking, arriving at your doorstep with wounded hearts and extraordinary resilience, challenging you to become more than you'd imagined possible. Lily yawned beside him, finally allowing her head to rest against his arm as exhaustion overcame habitual vigilance. "Can we have pancakes tomorrow?" she mumbled, eyes drooping despite valiant efforts to remain alert. "Absolutely," Alexander promised, this commitment well within his power to fulfill. "Chocolate chip or blueberry?" "Both," came the drowsy response, followed by the even breathing of deep sleep. Perhaps the most profound display of trust yet from this child who had learned to sleep lightly and wake at the slightest disturbance. Carefully, moving with deliberate gentleness to avoid waking her, Alexander lifted Lily and carried her inside to her bedroom. As he tucked the blanket around her shoulders, her fingers briefly clutched his sleeve before releasing a momentary connection between past and future, between what was lost and what might yet be found. He stood watching her sleep for several moments, marveling at how completely his priorities had reorganized themselves in less than a week. The board meeting, corporate acquisitions, market expansions, all had receded from urgency in his consciousness, replaced by concerns both smaller and vastly more significant. Proper formula temperature, nightmare protocols, creating security for 3 small humans who had experienced too much disruption. In the nursery across the hall, Thomas stirred briefly, making the tiny snuffling sounds that preceded full waking. Alexander moved silently to his crib, placing a gentle hand on the infant's back. and making soft, shushing sounds until the baby settled again. In the adjacent crib, Ellie slept peacefully, tiny fingers curled around the edge of her blanket, complete trust in her security evident in her relaxed features. Alexander's phone vibrated in his pocket. Vanessa again, with board fallout requiring attention. Corporate America continued its relentless pace, regardless of personal transformations. But as he glanced between the sleeping infants and the doorway, where Lily's form was just visible in the soft nightlight glow, Alexander Prescott made the decision that would reshape all their futures. Tomorrow, he would contact his legal team to begin permanency planning. Not temporary guardianship, not emergency placement, but adoption. Legal, permanent, irrevocable commitment. With Jordan's blessing if possible, without it if necessary. Though Alexander increasingly believed the man would support whatever arrangement kept his children together and thriving, the path forward would be complex, challenging, professionally disruptive, emotionally demanding. The board would resist, competitors would circle, adjustments would prove difficult. Parenting 3 traumatized children would require resources beyond wealth and influence, patience, empathy, humility, and courage in proportions he'd never before needed to summon. But watching these children sleep, their vulnerability and resilience equally evident, Alexander recognized with perfect clarity that some journeys, once begun, altered your direction permanently. Some calls to action, once answered, transformed. Not just circumstances, but identity itself. He was no longer simply Alexander Prescott, corporate titan and solitary success. He was becoming something both simpler and infinitely more complex. A father, not by birth but by choice, not through obligation but through recognition that these particular children needed this particular adult to stand between them and further harm. Outside the window, fireflies continued their luminous dance in the darkness, creating patterns of light that appeared random but contained profound purpose. Like the unexpected path that had led a billionaire tech mogul to become guardian to 3 abandoned children, beginning with a security alert and a 9-year-old girl struggling up a driveway with newborn twins in her determined grip. Sometimes, the most important journeys began with a single, startling moment of recognition. Here was need that you alone were positioned to address. Here was purpose beyond acquisition and accomplishment. Here was family, finding you when you didn't know you were lost. Alexander silenced his phone without checking the messages. Corporate America would still be there tomorrow. Tonight belonged to quieter, more consequential concerns. The steady breathing of 3 sleeping children who had begun, against all odds, to trust that tomorrow would bring security rather than abandonment. It was the most important work he had ever undertaken, and for the first time in decades, Alexander Prescott felt absolutely certain he was exactly where he belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.